Once in square, you have no rear or flank. Each of the 6 hexes surrounding you count as front hexes. You have a movement allowance of 1, but you can only spend this in actually changing your formation out of being in square. There's no shuffling across the battlefield you can do, so basically you can spend your 1 to go into line, or if you wish, go into column. Put the unit back in a square here. Now what happens is your fire value is modified by -2, but it's always going to be 1. So we can see that when in square, this is going to have a firepower of 1 in each of the surrounding 6 squares. And this is true even if you're like a really poor, trying to find what I did for that here. What was that Spanish unit I had before? There he is, he's over there. So this Spanish unit here has a firepower 1. If that goes into square, it still exerts 1 firepower, which is the minimum value that the game has. You use the printed melee value against attacking cavalry. So in this case, got a melee value of 2, 4, assuming it's not taken any step losses, it'd have a value of 8. Cavalry that attack you, and I'm sure I've got a cavalry unit knocking around here somewhere. Oh well, here we go. I've got some, I think there's a King German Legion here attacking. So they could attack with their 2 times 3, normally be a 6 attack. However, their value against the square, cavalry against the square, is always a value of 1. So they only attack with 2. So you can see you're a big advantage here. You're going to have 8. He's going to attack with 2. Probably going to call off the attack, I would have thought. However, you are a little bit more vulnerable to infantry. So if enemy infantry approach, and again let's bring up some Brits here, then your melee value is halved. Okay, melee value is halved, so it would be a 1. Okay, against their melee value, especially if they came at you in a column, they would have 1 onto it, so they'd have 3. In this case, it would have a 15. Okay, and you'd be just attacking with a very small number. It doesn't work very well either. In square, you cannot initiate a melee. You can only be attacked. You can't attack anyone else. But your morale is +2, but only against infantry-only attacks. So if we had a situation such as this, which is not looking good, okay, you've got cavalry and infantry, you wouldn't get the +2. If there's artillery present in a hex when a square is formed, you have a few options. The first thing you can do is you can decide whereabout you can change the stacking. So it can either be on top of the square, in which case it may fire, or it can be inside the square, in which case it can't fire at all. The thing you can't do is you can't change a artillery's formation or its facing when you form a square. So it's going to be pretty stuck where it is. You just got to decide whether it's going to be inside the square or outside the square. And let's have a look at how that works. So we formed a square here, and we have some unlimbered artillery. Okay. If it's on top of the square, remember it needs to share front-facing hexes, but as we know, these are front-facing hex all around, so it can actually be in any orientation. So it was in that orientation when the square was formed, because it doesn't have a chance to move it. It may fire half its value against cavalry. It may fire its full value against infantry and artillery. Okay. If cavalry melees the hex, the artillery would take as a minimum 1 step loss, regardless of the melee result. So if these guys come in and attack, regardless of what happens, because these guns are effectively outside or maybe on the corners of the square, they're going to take a step loss. And also, it doesn't get any morale benefit for being inside a square, because it's obviously not. If it's unlimbered, okay, there's no point in being outside the stack if it's unlimited. It can't do anything. Basically, if it's unlimited, you can have it inside the square. So the benefit for this is it's going to get +2 morale. However, it cannot fire. You can also form square in response to an enemy cavalry charge. This is something I don't recommend you do. Okay, I do it occasionally when I get caught out, but basically it's far safer to form square during your own turn. But in this case, say for instance, we have these light cavalry here. They declare a charge. They don't have to say the target is. In this case, there might be other units, so you don't know if it's going to charge you or not. But what happens when it charges, it changes into its en battle formation. Okay, so this case is pretty clear it's going to come after me, in which case you can then take a morale check. And you check the distance to the charging units. Here, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 3 plus any of those, I get +1 to my modifier if it's 3 or beyond. So I need to roll 9 or less. So a reasonably good chance of doing it. If it was closer, okay, and it might do, so it might be, I might think it's charging someone else, but then moves to here. Suddenly I think, hang on, now it's going to get me. I can then try a morale check. Within 2 hexes, there's no morale modifier. I'd have to roll an 8. And if for whatever reason it was right next to me when it declared a charge, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. I get no, you can't attempt to change square, but then, you know, what were you doing with a cavalry right next to you and you haven't formed square? Unless you've got another little plan in place and maybe you had some friendly cavalry here that could screen you. Anyway, the consequence, obviously, if you succeed, you go into the square, that's fine. And what you'll probably find 9 out of 10 times is the cavalry will then call off their charge. And they can do that automatically just by declaring themselves disorganised. Okay, and then they retreat out the way. So it's a valid tactic because obviously if there are other British infantry around here, forcing your guys into a square, these guys can come out and we know that they're at a disadvantage to infantry attacks. However, if they charge and you fail, and believe me, though, you know, in this case it's 3 hexes away, 9 or less, these things happen quite regularly. Not very keen on, happens to me a lot anyway when I do use it, so I tend not to, is your unit becomes disorganised. So we'd show that by placing a current turn marker, and let's say it's turn 2 because that's the counter I have available here. What would generally happen, as soon as you normally get demoralised, disorganised, sorry, you move back immediately 2 hexes. If in this particular case that doesn't happen, you have to stay where you are and accept the charge and all the terrible consequences of what happens from that, because being disorganised, as we're going to look shortly, is not a good thing. And basically, you know, unless you're very lucky or you've got a very big unit there, you are going to lose an awful lot of men and maybe even have that unit routed, which is very hard to come back from. If there's cavalry within, artillery with you shares the same fate as you normally do. So if you become demoralised, so do the infantry with you. Okay. If, for instance, I don't have another, do I have another French unit here? Yeah, okay. So I had another French unit here. Make sure I'm not violating stacking limits. There, I've got 10 there. So I'll keep moving off the screen. I've got 10 there. So say, for instance, the unit on the top attempts to form square, fails. Okay, the artillery of it, they are all disorganised. Okay, the unit below then has to do a check, but it does it with a -2 modifier. And if they fail, they're also disorganised. However, if they do succeed, the units at the front here, okay, do then retreat. Whether or not to form square or not is one of the real key decisions I find in this game system, and it really reflects that sort of paper, scissors, stone aspect of Napoleonic warfare. Little situations such as this, we see we've got some light cavalry here. This 10 reveals our light cavalry. We've got a pretty good British infantry unit here, and we have our French unit we've been looking at with some artillery. The artillery is stacked on top. It's only the top unit can fire. Okay. Now in the French turn, you've got some options here, and this is what you need to think of. I do have support in artillery, so I would be tempted, in this particular case, I would go to square and leave my artillery out the front. Okay, that's going to deter these guys from charging. It also means I can have artillery fire at these. Okay, I know there's a slight penalty, but it might slow those down. Okay, if I don't form square, then I have a few problems. Okay, maybe the charge declaration happens. You know, I like to try and stand. Okay, which is fine. It's a perfectly valid tactic. In this particular case, these light infantry, light cavalry, might be able to swing round and actually get me from the rear here. Okay, in which case my guns wouldn't be any good. The guns have a range of a fire arc like so. So these guys could swing round here, charge me in the rear. I'm in all sorts of trouble there. Okay, so maybe when they're on their way round, I could then think about going to square. It's a little bit late. Okay, then when it's there, these guys don't really need to do anything now. Why advance into the guns? Why not wait for these guys to do their business? So in that situation, if I was facing a tactical situation, I'd probably go to square during my turn. And this is the key bit about cavalry in particular. This is light cavalry, okay? Unless you're going to spend your time just chasing disorganised units around the board, which is a perfectly valid thing to do, you're going to get 2 charges out of them using the optional and advanced rules, maybe 3. You can see they're generally fragile units, and even a successful charge will generally see them taking a casualty. So often it's the threat of these more than the actually using them. So just by bringing this guy forward, I'm into square here, then maybe I would come forward. I might have to face the guns a bit, but I fancy my chances there a great deal more. Or maybe I'd bring up my own artillery, okay? And squares are particularly vulnerable to artillery. So some of the nuances of the game is sort of shown there. And that decision can be very agonising about whether to form square or not. But generally, I don't leave it to charge. I decide in my turn whether I'm going to form square or not. And it's usually sort of a Hobson's choice, okay, between getting hammered by the cavalry or getting hammered by the infantry and artillery. However, you know, if what I would need here in this particular case, if I could bring up some of my own cavalry here, say, or even, well, no, here, then if they did charge, I could countercharge. And regardless of the countercharge, okay, whether it's successful or not, if I countercharge, it's going to stop that charge. I don't actually have a French cavalry unit, say I had one here. Okay, maybe I wouldn't even bother with a square then. Just leave my guns on top. These guys come forward, countercharge, then that's neutralised. Okay, I might lose my cavalry, they might lose their cavalry. Okay, that's a choice I have. Next I want to talk about skirmishers or voltigeurs as they are in the rule book. With the standard rules, there are certain units classed as light infantry. They have this range marker of 2 here. Okay, and they can actually, though I've never actually played with these rules, you can deploy a whole unit into sort of skirmish formation. Don't particularly like that. It doesn't really reflect my reading of it, and it is reflected in the rules that suggested to use the optional rules of the skirmish rules, and the skirmish rules use these small skirmish counters. Okay, so let's have a little talk about those. Let's move that guy out of the way for a minute. Here's my French unit here. Each game in the system will tell you how many voltigeurs, how many skirmishers units can typically deploy. Let me just check my notes for this because I did say how many they have. So it's based on the unit's training and whether it's a light or line unit. We've talked about that. In the 4 Spanish battles games in which all these pieces are from, the French can deploy 1 line, okay? So I could deploy 1 skirmish unit to one of my front-facing hexes. Okay, I'll explain what they are for. And that's the same whether I'm in line or column. It's quite good to lead your column with a voltigeur unit, skirmish unit. Light units, they still have a benefit. So if I bring that light unit back, what have I done with him? Here, remember we can tell he's a light unit because he has the 2 here. He can deploy up to 3 skirmish voltigeur units. Okay, 1, 2. I don't have a third one on me at the moment, so it could do another one. And it has the benefit that it can actually deploy them anywhere around it due to their unique training, where for regular units they can only deploy into a hex they can fire into. So in line I could deploy it here or here, and in column Obviously, I can only deploy it straight ahead. British and Portuguese units in the Spanish can deploy 1 skirmish unit in the Spanish game. The King's German Legion and Light Division can do 2. Okay, let's start with deploying our skirmishers. Now, you get 2 opportunities per turn to deploy skirmishers. You can do it at any point in your movement phase, and you can do it in the rally phase. You have to, if you're a regular unit, into one of your 2 front firing hexes. These have 2 front facing hexes. So if you are in a column, you'd have to decide whether you're going to have him at that angle with these 2 front facing hexes or these 2 front facing hexes. Okay, let's put it back into his line formation. Let's put him there. Okay, you cannot deploy any more Voltigeurs than the number of steps you have remaining. Okay, it's not a problem with this because there's only 1, but for several units it will make a difference. If you've got some units stacked together, okay, so there's another French unit on top here, in which case it'd be good to have this guy stacked on top because he could deploy multiple. Only the unit on top can deploy the Voltigeurs, the skirmishers. I have to say skirmishers, my French pronunciation is atrocious. Now, a key bit is that by deploying them, deploying it doesn't affect the number of steps you have. You're putting a screen out there, and it's quite a nebulous grouping of people out here. It's got firepower of 1 into its front-facing hexes, but at many points it will be from deployed. It will be reintegrated back into your unit, and this happens quite regularly in a game. It comes in and goes out. You don't need to track this on here at all. Okay, all you need to know is this unit belongs to that one. Although if I had a second French unit here, one here, it doesn't really matter. You have to keep track of who's. It just doesn't matter. I'll explain why that is in a moment. Okay, so we know they can fire with firepower value of 1. Now, the interesting thing about this firepower of 1 is it can never be modified. Okay, this is really important. For instance, if you're attacking into a town, which normally gives a -2 to your firepower, this would always still be a 1. So your skirmisher is going to be as good as your unit, really, firing into a town, and that's because the massed fire of your line is not going to be any more effective than your skirmishers picking off targets at walls and through windows and such like. It can also add 1 firepower to someone else. So say this unit was here, and they're firing upon let's choose a different unit. Let's have some Portuguese. Okay, firing on this Portuguese unit here. We know we've got a firepower of 3. Let me see if I can get that. Firepower of 3 plus the 1 from here. So we could attack here with a firepower of 4. Let me bring these back a bit because they seem to be escaping off the board a little bit. Some of the benefits you have is if enemy artillery target you, and I don't have any British or Allied artillery. So say for this unit here was firing at these guys here. Okay, they would get a -1 to their firepower. In case this would be 6, that would be 6, 5, 4. It'd be 4 normally. Take 1 off, so it would only count as 3. So they've got a certain screening effect. Don't worry too much about that range. I'll explain that in the artillery rules. If there were additional Voltigeurs in the way of the shot, okay, you still only take -1 off it. They don't particularly stack. Okay. Now the rules have a couple of ways to explain how to move these. Effectively, they sort of move in pulses, and I think reading some of the comments online, I think it's simpler than a lot of people think. Okay, so you could think of I'm moving 1 forward and pulses. So you move that forward and then move your Voltigeur out. I have to say often when I'm playing, I just take these off, move, and put them back on as and when they're going to have an effect on play. So you can do either way, but I do find I just remove them, move my units, pop them back when you think it's going to have an effect, really. If 2 Voltigeur units or ever skirmish units are ever on the same hex at the same time at the end, you just absorb 1 back in. Okay, it can only be 1 in each hex. They cannot stack with enemy units, so they have no stacking, so it couldn't stack with, if this Voltigeur belonged to this unit here, they can't stack together. They never stack. If it's there, you just reintegrate. And what I mean by reintegrate, you just take it off the board, and then you can place it again with another movement phase or in your rally phase at the end. I haven't really covered this yet, but there's opportunity fire in the game. Okay, so for instance, when this Portuguese unit moves forward, that doesn't trigger opportunity fire. Okay, that would be regular defensive fire in the regular defensive fire phase. But if, however, it moved across the field of fire from one hex to the other, that would incur opportunity fire. It doesn't happen often with infantry. It can happen a fair bit with cavalry occasionally, or if there's somewhere you really need to go, and that triggers opportunity fire. And a skirmisher unit extends that opportunity fire option. So if this guy was moving across here, he could be attacked with one firepower, opportunity firepower. However, this Portuguese unit could deploy its own Voltigeur, and again, I don't have any allied skirmishers out at the moment. So during its movement phase, it could just place it on that hex, and that causes two in one place. They just cancel each other out, and they're reintegrated. Basically, they push the skirmish screens pushed back. So it's like, don't cross the streams. So in this case, if this Portuguese unit, for whatever reason, it wanted to come across here for a reason, I wouldn't necessarily put its skirmish unit. And again, sorry, this is not an allied skirmish unit, it's a French one. It's all I've got to hand at the moment. I wouldn't bother placing that down. I would move 1, 2, and at this point I would say, oh, I'm deploying my skirmishers here. That will cancel those two out. They get redeployed. And then I could carry on my movement without getting the, well, I've exceeded my movement factors there, without getting some opportunity fire on you. So I tend to be a little bit more free and easy with that, and just put them out as and when they make a difference. So often in this case, I have a situation such as, I'm going to assault this French unit. Okay, it's got skirmishers there. I could deploy my skirmishers, we're only into the front hex here. So I might move to 1, because I'm in column, I get a free change here. And I say I'm deploying my skirmishers out. Basically, I'm sending my skirmish screen out. Skirmish machine out. They will cancel those out. I could then move into attack. So the skirmish screen's sort of gone. The other thing you need to know about skirmish, well, there's a few things you need about skirmish. So the other thing you need is, as soon as cavalry get near them, they retreat back. So as soon as a cavalry unit goes anywhere near any adjacent hex, it causes these guys to be reintegrated straight away, as you can understand. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've missed on there. They're not considered units. Only bit in the rules where they talk about units. These are not units. Okay, quite useful. They do tend to cancel each other out mainly in battle, so I do sometimes forget about them. You know, if I've got two lines of infantry attacking each other, I do tend to forget sometimes, because they do sort of cancel each other out. But I do find, especially around the flanks or when the game becomes a bit more fluid, that you do have these opportunities where they can make quite a difference. Just having him there, again, they cut off, say, this guy here. If I was here, maybe move the cavalry out of the way, but, you know, got enemy infantry around, they're going to have to do something with these guys. Particularly, you know, if you're fighting the Spanish, you're going to find these Voltigeurs are great, because what's going to happen is you move here, you can't deploy, the Spanish can't deploy any skirmishers to get rid of these, so if they want to attack me here, they have to move into this square, which triggers opportunity fire. So now my skirmishers will attack them, only one firepower, but you never know, it's something, and then these will get reintegrated back into my unit. So they do have some benefits. I like playing with them. I find that quite easy, especially if you don't sweat it too much with the pulsing movement like the rules can suggest. Is I just take them off, move my guys, stick them back down as and when they're useful. Let's discuss one of Napoleon's favourite formations, mixed order. He wrote quite a lot about this. Mixed order is a combination of infantry and artillery, or infantry and infantry, which we'll actually look at here because it's a bit more interesting, sharing the same hex. Okay, so What it means is by mixed order is they're in different formations. So for instance, we could combine a line and a column together into one square. Okay, so we'd have the firepower of the line, we'd have the assault value of the column, and you can see that's a pretty valuable thing to have. In order to do so, we need to share at least two front hex sides, which, like we talked about before. So the line below have these two front hexes, the column in front have 1, 2, 3, they share 2. This is a legal formation. Okay. Now in the game, only the unit on the top may fire. So for a mixed order to be particularly successful, you often see them placed like so. Okay, so let's see how does this actually benefit anyone? So let's find a Brit. Here's our British defender here. Okay. Now it doesn't matter what order we do, so I'm going to move my line guys forward first. 1, 2. Okay, if they had skirmishes, they would have cancelled each other out. I then will move up my column. 1, 2, and in the movement phase you can reorder things. So I'm going to put my column below. Okay, so what's the benefit of this mixed formation? Well, the way the turn goes, we then have defensive fire first. So this unit here will fire at the top unit. Okay, so they're going to fire at the guys in line here. Okay, so it might break them, which it does. It could possibly leave my column behind. I'd obviously have to take a morale check as well. Okay, but say for instance they deplete them a little bit, we then get advanced fire with this unit. Okay, if it's still in good order, I can fire my free forward, and then in my melee phase I can melee with a unit underneath. Okay, so you sort of get the best of both worlds. It's a really useful tactic to develop.